Welcome. I'm pleased to be joined by Troy Amen, an MD MBA student at Harvard Medical School and Harvard Business School, and the first author on our first study that we will be focusing on for today's J.R. Gladden Orthopedic Society Scientific Committee review of the literature. I'm also joined by Dr. Antonia Chen. She's an associate professor of orthopedic surgery at Harvard Medical School and a total joint arthroplasty surgeon at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Chen is the PI of the study Persistent Racial Disparities in Utilization Rates and Perioperative Metrics in Total Joint Arthroplasty in the US, a comprehensive analysis of trends from 2006 to 2015 that was recently published in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for having us.
So first, I'd like to ask you a question, Troy. So kind of what led to the undertaking of the study?
Yeah, so I think there's two reasons. And the first is slightly more personal. So I've kind of seen over time firsthand how these disparities have affected many people within the African-American community, including family members and close friends. And so because of this, I have a fairly strong personal attachment to really understanding this issue. The second is our team noticed that there hasn't been a lot of work done on racial disparities in orthopedics coming out of Harvard Medical School. And so we really wanted to change that. And so now we're actually working on multiple studies with a few other students, and we hope that that trend continues to grow.
Fantastic, fantastic. And now that you've undertaken the study and it's been published, can you summarize the key findings for viewers?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of work has been done to kind of document racial disparities within total joint arthroplasty over the last decade. However, there's been very, very little data on how these disparities have actually trended or changed over time, especially with respect to the last 15 years. So the main purpose of this study was to investigate these trends in racial disparities, how they've changed, i.e. how they've narrowed or how they've grown within total joint arthroplasty. And so we focused primarily on disparities in utilization rates in total hip and total knee arthroplasty between Black and white patients. And we also focused on a few other perioperative metrics, including length of stay, discharge destination, inpatient complications, and mortality. And so what we found in our study was that there are actually persisting and in many cases worsening racial disparities in total joint arthroplasty care between Black and white patients in the United States. And so some of the persisting disparities that we found were actually in utilization rates between Black and white patients, and also with respect to the length of stay for these patients after they've had their procedures. What's perhaps most concerning, though, or more concerning, was that we found worsening racial disparities in the discharge disposition for Black patients, and also worsening disparities in complication rates after total knee arthroplasty for these patients.
Dr. Chen, do you have anything to add along to Troy's comments as well?
You know, it's interesting. When we first were talking about this, we were hopeful. We were hopeful that over time that would actually improve the trends. Once you bring something to light in literature, normally that inspires people to really watch out for it and really change how we practice. And we were actually disheartened by the results, not in a bad way per se, in that like we know we can take action going forward. And I think we see that on a national stage now, which is great. But it is kind of sad to see that we thought we put more into it and we didn't put enough effort into it. So it's a good wake-up call.
Absolutely. And so now that we have these findings, and Dr. Chen alluded to this, what do we think about going forward? How can we address these, and where can we go from here?
The hard part is that it's a nationwide study, right? So this is not something that's happening in one institution. This is happening throughout the whole country. And so to do so, I think we can only start with what we have in control of ourselves right now, which are our patients in front of us. You know, so how do we start in the community? How do we raise awareness that total joint arthroplasty is a life-changing event and it can improve their quality of life, and that utilization of it sometimes in some cultures are a stigma to undergo surgery. You do everything non-operative as long as possible before undergoing surgery, but you realizing the benefits of it, seeing patients who do well with it, trying to tie the community to each other, and I think that can make a big difference. Educating surgeons and fellows, residents, medical students to also educate their patients, right? Only one person has so much reach, but as a whole community, we have a pretty big reach on patients, letting them know that. Two, one thing that our hospital has done, I think many hospitals across the country have done recently, are remove some stigmas, such as if you have creatinine clearance, there's a certain change that you have to add to it, or a changing factor for African Americans. And so we should approach patients and say, look, you don't have to discharge them to a SNF. You don't have to discharge them to a rehab facility. And we see that as a disparity, whether or not it's an expectation of patients or whether it's an expectation of physicians, we don't know, right? We can't discern that from the study, but we have the power to say to them, being at home is a powerful thing. Rehabbing in your own facility and not being exposed to other organisms, and especially in the era of COVID, you don't get exposed to other patients. That can be really beneficial and really powerful. So we have a big voice in the messaging as well. And complications after surgery, we can mitigate a lot of that with preoperative optimization of patients that we may not do as well, or primary care doctors are overwhelmed. So if those are things that we can take on as orthopedic surgeons, try to coordinate care, which we're starting to do more and more of, especially in this bundled era of payment, we can actually make a difference, hopefully.
Absolutely. Troy, do you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think this study, unfortunately, continues to reinforce, like Dr. Chen said, what researchers already have known, right? That racial disparities are very much present within total joint arthroplasty. But I think what's most important is that these disparities are not improving. And this is a huge problem, right? This is what's actually concerning, is that all these national initiatives by policymakers, by orthopedic surgeons, are not having their intended effects, like Dr. Chen mentioned. And so that's like a really depressing story that's being told here, that essentially we know that there's a problem and our solutions to address this problem are failing our patients. But I think there's actually a lot of hope moving forward. A really interesting study that was published just last year out of the Kaiser Permanente network actually showed that racial disparities in arthroplasty care were essentially eliminated or non-existent in a universally insured or single payer system. And so the authors suggest that it might not actually just be the universal insurance coverage that's eliminating these disparities, but actually the standardized protocols and treatment guidelines that minimize variability in care. And so I really think, like Dr. Chen said, the next step for us as an orthopedic community is that not only do researchers and orthopedists need to continue describing the disparities in care, but more importantly, they need to actually research creative ways in which they begin to solve some of these issues, i.e. creating evidence-based algorithms or guidelines that minimize variability and physician bias. And I think more importantly, what the orthopedic community needs to do is admit that there are disparities in orthopedic surgical care, right? So there's a study published 3 years ago in 2017 that surveyed over 300 orthopedic surgeons and found that only 68% of them believe that there is some sort of evidence in disparities in orthopedic care. And so I think it's really important that these studies are highlighting that these disparities exist and that they're actually not improving. And then lastly, I think we really need to increase diversity within orthopedics. Like, we have to recruit more minority patients, more minority students into the profession. We have to provide them with mentorship and fix these leaky pipelines that are essentially causing so many bright Black, Hispanic, and female students to drop out. A recent study that was just published last year by Dr. Franklin shows that orthopedic surgery is actually the least diverse of any surgical specialty, and that diversity over time has not been improving. And so I genuinely believe that a lot of the issues at hand here will start to be fixed and can be fixed if we start increasing both the racial and gender diversity within orthopedics.
Absolutely. Those are both both of you provided very insightful points and takeaway messages and action items for everyone listening to this. So we thank you for that, and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to future research from both of you in this area moving forward. Thank you.